Hey guys, so while I'm gone, I am going to give you guys a video. It does go over 3 different questions from your quest review. In case you get stuck, please use these just to guide you, not to give you answers. Okay, so I'm going to start with question number 2. The directions say solve the equations, check for extraneous solutions, and state the domain exceptions. So what we're going to start with is actually finding the denominator. Remember, that means we have to factor it first. So if I factor the first one, it's going to look like y minus 4 times y plus 1. Okay. And I factor the other denominator, I'm going to end up with y plus 1 and y minus 1. Okay, remember when we talked about this originally, we looked for what they had in common, which this time is a y plus 1. So that's telling me what I need to multiply by on the other side in order to get the same denominator all the way across. Okay, so for the first one, it looks like I am missing the y minus 1. Y minus 1. Okay. And the second one, I am missing the y minus 4. So I'm going to multiply those. And remember, you multiply top and bottom. So you end up with a very large denominator. And that is okay. So on top, you end up with y minus 1. And then you have your large denominator. Okay, and that's equal to 2y, remember you're distributing here, 2y minus 8. Okay, now at this point, some of you guys have already said, well, if the denominator is the same, you don't need it, which is true. Okay, so if you want to, you can cross this out, or some of you guys are like, well, I'd never wrote it in the first place, you can erase it. Okay, and what you're left with is just y minus 1 equals 2y minus 8. So now you're going to move your y's to one side of the equation. So I'm subtracting y, and then I'm going to add the 8 to the other side. Okay. So that's going to give me 7 equals y. Okay, remember we do want to make sure that that works in our equation. If I look at the bottom, this is where the domain restrictions come from. So we said x cannot equal anything that makes our denominator 0. So it can't make 1. I think it's y, excuse me. Y cannot equal 1 or negative 1 or 4. That would make our denominator 0. Okay, looks like we're good. If you wanted to like quadruple check it, you could plug that back into the original and you would end up with something like this. 1 over 24 equals 1 over 24. Okay, so that's just checking it, making sure that 7 actually does work if you plug that back into the original equation. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to go over question number 5. That was the next one that got picked. Okay, so I'm going to go over question number 5. Give myself a little more room here. There we go. Okay, so question number 5 is very similar, but I've seen a lot of people struggle with the denominators when they look like this. Okay, you can use this one to help you with number 2 if you get stuck on number 2 as well. It's very similar. Okay, so if I look at my denominators, they're actually very, very similar. I can rewrite this first one if I take out a negative 1 as x minus 1. Okay, so notice how easy it is to make one look like the other. Okay, so what I really need is for all of my denominators to have a negative 1 and the value x minus 1. So what that's telling me is over here, this one is missing the negative 1 top and bottom. Okay. But that 3 is missing both pieces. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to multiply it times that 1 minus x top and bottom, because that tells me it's already got the negative 1 and the x minus 1 together. Okay. So some of you guys are like, okay, no denominator needed. If you do need the denominator, please write that every time. This would be over 1 minus x. Okay, if I distribute that 3, I end up with 3 minus 3x over 1 minus x. Okay, and minus 1 over 1 minus, and this will be a plus 1 because it's minus a negative 1 now. Okay, over 1 minus x. Okay, so if you don't need those denominators, feel free to erase them, feel free to not have written them in the first place, cross them out, whatever makes it easiest for you. Okay, so here's a much more basic equation now. Okay, so I'm going to combine some like terms. So I have negative 2 equals 4 minus 3x. Then I'm going to subtract that 4 to both sides. That's negative 6 equals negative 3x. And then when I divide by negative 3, I get that x equals 2. Now again, we do want to make sure that that doesn't conflict with any domain restrictions. So if I look back at my original, okay, we want to think of what number we would plug in there that would make that a 0. So I know that x cannot be a positive 1 because that would make my denominator a 0. Okay. So this does check out. It is not a negative or a positive 1. Okay, so if I plug it back in, you're more than welcome to. You should end up with 2 equals 2. Okay, that's also another way to double check. Okay, the last one that I'm going to do is actually on the back of your worksheet. I'm going to do one of the graph problems, and I did notice that the one that got chosen was the slant asymptote. So let's get on over to that one, number 12. Okay, let's see if I can move the screen. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to do number 12 now. This is a slant asymptote one, which means that we are going to do some long division, okay? So remember, your denominator is always going to give you your vertical asymptote. This is a x equals negative 1. Okay. And I knew it was a slant asymptote instead of a horizontal asymptote because the top power is bigger than the bottom power. So my x squared is bigger than my x. Okay. So that means I'm going to do my long division, and I'm going to do it over here to the side. Okay, remember, you always take, whoa, hold up, guys. Okay, always take your first value and divide it by the first value on the outside. So you're really thinking x squared divided by x, which is x. Okay, that's what goes on top up there. Then you take that and you multiply by each piece. So you have x squared and x. Okay. When you subtract this time, these both cancel and all you're left with is 4. Now that is actually your remainder. At that point, you cannot take 4 divided by x for long division. So at that point, the only thing that you have up top is x. So your slant asymptote is y equals x. Okay. Remember, I do want you to look for wholes. That would be if something on the top factored and something on the bottom factored and something would cancel. If it cancels, there's whole where that cancels at. Okay. I also will be looking for you guys to make a graph based on points that you came up with. Okay, so my graph, I'm going to use the points -2, -6, 0, 4, 1, 3, and 2, 3, and a third. Now you can use different points. Okay, remember, it should not probably be the same as the person next to you. If you're working on this together, that's okay, but remember, don't copy. Okay. So I'm going to start by putting my asymptotes on the graph. There's one at -1 for vertical, and I have a slant asymptote at y equals x. I do have my points, so I'm going to go over to -2 and go down to -6. I have 0, 4, 1, 3, and 2, 3 and a third. Now this is just telling me where that graph is. And normally I would have you guys choose some 2 to the left and 2 to the right of the vertical asymptote. As long as you are drawing it in the correct area, I do not mind. Your graph might look slightly different than mine, but it should be very similar. If your graph did something, it should have been like maybe a little lower than my graph was originally there. Okay, and then also make sure you're stating domain and range. Okay, this one, your range is going to vary based on slant asymptotes. I really care when you have a horizontal asymptote what your range is. Okay, so this one I would do your range. Wow. Okay, your range is going to be all real numbers, but y cannot equal x, okay, because that's based on your slant asymptote. And then your domain, all real numbers, okay, but x cannot be -1. Remember, that comes from your vertical asymptote. Okay, if you guys have any more questions, I will be back tomorrow. We will have one more study day since I was absent, and then you guys will have your test on Thursday. Please make sure you are working on this worksheet, okay? I do not want to see blank ones when I get back. All right, have a good day, guys.